And I am spot on.
Okay. Allow me to quote this Treasury data, which shows between October and April, that is last year until April the previous month. Treasury data shows that the new administration, the Kenya Kwanza administration, tapped into loans worth 425 billion Kenya shillings, which is more than 434.6 billion that the Jubilee government borrowed in the same period when it came to power in 2013. You are therefore above by what Uhuru borrowed at the same period by 17.4 billion Kenya shillings. Why the contradictory position?
It's not contradictory.
Why borrow more?
The budget, my friend, we are using is Uhuru's budget. The budget you will hold me to account is the one we are discussing. You know, when you have a budget in place, even if you came into office today, unless you go to Parliament to change the way the budget is funded, you can't. They had budgeted to borrow in that budget. They had budgeted to borrow 1.1 trillion. I came using the supplementary budget, I cut it down by 300 billion, right? But you see, the train had left the station. So the borrowing was more because in the budget that was read and passed by Parliament, it was meant to be more. All I did is that it wasn't as big as they had anticipated. They had actually wanted to borrow $1.1 trillion.
Your Excellency,
which I cut down.
Budget deficit as at June last year for the current financial year, the budget deficit that had been approved by Parliament was 833 billion shillings. Of course, the Uhuru administration was there.
That was a false number, because when we came into office, we found that they had not factored about 130 billion of pending bills. They had not factored almost 90 billion that was meant to be given to counties. They were hiding figures. And that is why I want to run a transparent government. I want to run a government that's accountable. I want my minister and my administration to be asked questions. And that is why I believe in accountability, and I want an opposition that will hold the government to account. And that is why I am against the handshake. Because in a handshake situation, there is no accountability. That is how a government can hide borrowing the way it was hidden in the last budget.
What then will you tell the people? If I look at just the figures of the deficits and how much it keeps fluctuating, at the beginning of a financial year, there is what the National Treasury takes to Parliament, and it's approved as a budget and a deficit. And if I look throughout the year, it always gets adjusted halfway through or midway through the year. 2014, 2015, the approved deficit was 417 billion shillings. By the end of the financial year, it had risen to 533 billion shillings, a jump of 28%. If I just go into another one, 2018, 2019, the approved deficit was 608 billion shillings. It jumped to 734, 21% jump in deficit. This time, you're going to Parliament seeking a deficit of 664 billion shillings and saying, I want to borrow and stay within this. Are you telling the people of Kenya that the Kenya Kwanza administration in the first year will not go back to Parliament and seek to borrow more than 664 billion?
Let me first explain why when government says we are going to have this deficit, sometimes they have to borrow more because what they had anticipated to collect, they could not collect.
Correct.
That's why collection is very important, number one. Number two, sometimes the measures they want to use to raise the revenue, sometimes they don't pass in Parliament. So if a certain measure that was supposed to raise 20 billion does not pass, then you have 20 billion short. Then you have to borrow to cover that 20 billion. So that's why sometimes it has to change. I want to tell you, I will do my very best, by God's grace. If Parliament approves my budget the way it is, I will, to the extent possible, make sure that I live to the commitment I have made to make this budget, the deficit, to come down from the current 5.7 to 4.4. And I want to move it further next year. I have said we are better off, building our own resources, using our own taxes. And I have told the people of Kenya, let us be honest to ourselves. We are not overtaxing ourselves. Our taxes are 16% of GDP. Our peers, South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and the others, they are at 22, 25, 28% of GDP. If we have to measure up our public goods, if we have